Welcome to everyone joining us for this month's ECR Wednesday webinar, hosted by ELife, the series that aims to give early career researchers a platform to discuss issues important to you and your research career. My name's Emma, I work for the ELife Features team, and today we're discussing how to organise and advocate for the causes that are important to you. The webinar will begin with the panellists sharing their stories. Then, in the second half of the webinar, we'll be putting your questions to them. To ask a question, you can type in the question box on the GoToWebinar Functions panel, or you can tweet us, we are ELife_careers, using the ECR Wednesday hashtag. Please also join us on Twitter immediately after the webinar, where we'll be continuing discussion under the ECR Wednesday hashtag. Finally, I'd just like to let you know that we are recording the webinar and will make it available on YouTube in the near future. Now I'll pass over to Brianne to introduce herself and the panelists.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today for our Early Career Researcher Wednesday webinar on making your voice heard. Today we are discussing how the early career community is self-organizing locally and internationally to influence the future of research communication. My name is Brianne Kent and I'm a postdoc at the University of British Columbia, a member of the ELife Early Career Advisory Group, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. So to give you a bit of background, ELife, our host for today, is a nonprofit organization founded by 3 research funders, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, the Wellcome Trust, and Max Planck Institute. It is an initiative led by scientists for scientists, with the mission to publish outstanding research in the life sciences and biomedicine with an efficient and effective peer review process that accelerates publishing, recognizes responsible behaviors, and that doesn't emphasize impact factor, but rather tries to expand and enrich the concept of research impact. ELife also makes it a priority to support early career researchers, and for the past 3 years has had an early career advisory group. Everyone at ELife is keenly aware of the unique pressures faced by junior investigators, and are working to create a more positive publishing experience that will, among other things, help early career researchers receive the recognition that they deserve. I'm personally passionate about changing the way that science is published, which is why I was a member, or still am, a member of the ELife Early Career Advisory Group. And this group gives ELife input on how to reform scientific publishing to create a truly innovative scientific journal for the life sciences, as well as what's needed to help early careers to succeed and thrive. For those interested in the advisory group, there's currently a nomination process to recruit new members, so I'll briefly talk about that at the end of the call. So now I would like to welcome our 4 wonderful speakers for today. We have Gary McDowell, who's the Executive Director of Future of Research, Karina Logan, who's a research fellow at the University of Cambridge, Osman Altieri, Director of Sedan, and Nick Shoki, Director of Programs and Engagement at Spark. Thank you all for joining us today for our webinar. As most everyone should know, over the next hour, our speakers will tell us examples of where early career scientists are getting their peer groups together, either in person or online, how they're advocating within their institutions, and what we can achieve once we have these strong groups in place. So, as you heard, please follow us on Twitter for the discussion at ELife_careers and with the hashtag ECR Wednesday. To get the conversation started, get everyone thinking about advocacy in the early career community, let's start with why it's important. So why should we be organizing? Why should we be advocating? Why are we hosting a webinar today on this topic? Well, for early career researchers, it's all too common that we become discouraged by what we see as major flaws in how science is conducted, what is valued, and the harmful side effects to this intense competition for jobs. And within the early career researcher community, there is a very clear vision for the future of science that values curiosity over speed, integrity over impact, and diversity, creativity, and reproducibility. And we, as early career researchers, are committed to realizing this vision and not waiting for change to happen, but being part of the solution. Now, sometimes there's a fear to speak up, partly because we don't want to be viewed as complainers in academia and out of concern that speaking up might negatively affect our careers. But many of us here today believe that the potential benefits from advocacy outweigh the risks. So what are some of the benefits to advocacy? The moral support that comes from bringing together your peer group and working towards a solution together. Advocacy may also improve how we will be evaluated as scientists, hopefully, which could directly affect career progression in a positive way. And finally, advocacy may lead to improved working conditions for researchers at the early stages of their career, which is too often associated with low wages and little to no job security. So we see the changes that are needed in science, and we have been active and effective at speaking out for open science, reforming research assessment, and gender equity, and several other issues which we will hear about today. So we're going to turn to our first poll question for the audience, just to see who's interested in what. So what is your goal? Is your goal to organize or advocate in your institution, in your region, nationally, or internationally? Just to get a sense of who's joining us today. Do we have any results? It's usually pretty quick. So quite a mix. So lots of people looking for advocacy in institution, locally, nationally, internationally. Yeah, it's quite an even spread. That's great. So our speakers can keep that in mind. Oh, there you are. Lost the screen for a second. Great. So on that note, now that we know who's in the audience, we will open the floor to our speakers. Each will be asked to address what they do and why, who they're bringing together, how they got started, tips and tricks for others to follow suit who are looking to advocate in either their institution or internationally, and also the networking and advocacy groups that are out there already and that our speakers know about. So up first is Karina Logan, who is a research fellow at the University of Cambridge and a member of OpenCon CAM. Karina aims to improve scientific rigor by promoting ethical and non-discriminatory publishing practices. So welcome, Karina. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to hearing about the unique challenges of working within your institution.
Thank you, Brianne. So yeah, I'm in the Department of Zoology at the University of Cambridge, and I met Alicia Carter there, who is a member of the ELife Early Career Researcher Group. And she, just over lunches, would ask me, I'd submit a paper somewhere and it would get accepted, and she would ask me why I published where I did. And I didn't have any good answers. So I started doing some research to find out how publishing works and what are the differences between the publishers and open access versus not. And I was absolutely outraged by what I found. I was outraged because I realized I'm giving away my research products for free to publishers who are publicly traded, and they're making tons and tons of money off of the products that the public originally paid for. So that's not okay with me, and I wanted to organize and advocate to change things. And first what I did was I changed myself. So I changed my publishing choices to only publish in gold open access at journals that are at ethical publishers. And I explained the difference between ethical and exploitative publishing practices in an article that I just published at F1000 Research, and I'll send a tweet about that later so you can read more if you're interested. Oh, cool. Thanks. So I originally started giving talks on what I was finding and every time I did, people were amazed by this is how publishing works. Are you serious? And a lot of them were early career researchers, and they were coming up to me afterwards saying, you know, I'd really love to change my publishing practices, but I feel like I can't because I need to publish in these particular journals to get a job. So I want to take a pause here to do another poll question. And this poll question is, do you feel pressured into publishing in journals that don't have open options for the article, the data, the review history, and so on? So the question is in the context of what I was finding from early career researchers who were telling me that they do feel pressured. They feel like they're under threat to that they might not get a job because of if they make ethical publishing choices, that they'll get discriminated against for grant proposals, and that this is a prevalent aspect of academic culture. So, do we have results from the poll? Okay, we've got about 70% feel high or some amount of pressure. So it does seem like the majority of us have experienced this aspect of academic culture. So what I'm doing today is the start of a press campaign that I'm calling Bullied into Bad Science. And it is, at this point, it is a letter to early career researchers where they can sign on to as many of these 8 actions that several of us early career researchers have identified that would help institutions and individuals better support us in changing academic culture and stop the bullying that we're experiencing. So I will post a tweet about this later so you can fill in and sign the survey that I'm taking if you feel pressured in academia. So also, you know, early career researchers, we're the largest academic group out of all of the academic groups. So if we do things like change our values or change our individual choices, that in itself is enough to make quite a large change in academic culture. And academic culture, what is that? All it is the individuals that are in academia, it's their values that they have. So if the majority of us change the values, that changes academic culture. And I was thinking about this because I study social learning in birds, and I was thinking, well, you know, that's how I study social learning, which ends up can be culture. So it actually, I think, is more simple than we're making it out to be. So alongside all this, I was also on a rampage against Elsevier because in December last year, University of Cambridge signed a really exploitative contract with Elsevier. Exploitative in the sense that it exploits us researchers and it exploits the university. And they signed the contract in a contradiction to the evidence that many researchers across the university were providing them, saying that, look, researchers, we want you to fight for our researcher rights. That's what therefore you're negotiating these contracts, and so we want better negotiation on behalf of researchers. And they decided to sign the contract anyway, despite evidence that we were all providing them, we being a lot of researchers from a lot of different departments across the university. So what's happened since then is, so Cambridge is an 800-year-old institution, and there are 800 years of layers of bureaucracy, and it's really difficult to penetrate. So in terms of the tips I can share with you for what works, and I don't know if it works yet, we'll see, but we started out being loud. So we gathered data in our departments for which researchers were willing to make short-term sacrifices for long-term gains, and almost 100% of researchers that I surveyed in zoology were. And then we got loud saying, all right, you just signed this contract on our behalf, that's not what we wanted. So we reported the committee to a governing body at the university to make them more transparent and accountable. We don't have the results on that yet, but we should soon. When I say we, there was this group of researchers from across the university. I call it my rampage group. And there are some of us are early career researchers, and some of us are professors, and one's a librarian. And so we were just strategizing. And this was a huge resource for me, and something I definitely recommend, finding allies across your university. Because it's a safe space where we can strategize and figure out what to do to try and penetrate this massive amount of bureaucracy. So we started talking to everyone we could who were on these committees that we were trying to influence, and asking them, how does the committee work? Why did you make this decision? And understanding where they were coming from. And in the process, I ended up getting invited to join 2 of the super secret committees that I've been trying to pound the doors down on. Somehow I got in, and I don't exactly know how, because it's not exactly a democratic process. So I'm hoping that now that I'm on the committees, I can start to influence the actions. Of course, it'll depend on whether I'm outvoted or not, I'm hoping I can at least get some changes made. So joining committees, trying to become one of the decision makers, and definitely telling the committees responsible what you want and what you don't want. And in the past, it seemed like they hadn't really heard from researchers, so I think people need to hear from researchers and constantly about what we want and what's okay and what's not okay with us. So I'll stop there and hand it back to you, Brianna.
Thank you. Well, that was great. And now our next speaker is Gary McDowell, who is the Executive Director of Future of Research, which is a nonprofit organization that promotes grassroots advocacy amongst junior scientists to advance improvement and reform of the scientific enterprise. Future of Research has successfully advocated for changes in the US and is inspiring advocacy in other countries as well. And actually, I was involved in organizing Future of Research Vancouver. So thank you, Gary, for inspiring advocacy and change around the world. And thank you for being here. We look forward to hearing about what it's like to get people in your peer group together from your experience. Take it away.
Thank you. Thanks for that great introduction. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. So yeah, as Brianne introduced, this is sort of the work that Future of Research is doing, trying to help particularly junior folks get together and to discuss the problems they're facing, and also particularly not just to discuss and complain, but also to try and figure out solutions that we can come up with. And then we now as an organization try to figure out ways that we can push for those changes. So in terms of getting folks together, how our very first meeting happened in Boston in 2014 was a bunch of postdocs, primarily at Harvard Med, led by Kristen Krukenberg and Jessica Polka, who some of you may know is now the director of the ASAP Bio preprints movement. They were discussing a paper that had come out by Bruce Alberts, Shirley Tillman, Mark Hirscher, and Harold Varmus, rescuing US biomedical research from its systemic flaws. And it was this opinion paper that was talking about the hyper-competition in the biomedical research system, very biomedicine focused, but a lot of what it discusses is also relevant to academia throughout. And it was very interesting. It was all senior scientists discussing this. We wanted to come up with a response from the junior scientific community. And so the idea was to have this conference, get people together, educate them on what's happening in the Boston area, and then brainstorm solutions to a variety of problems that we'd identified we wanted to focus on, and basically issue a white paper on it. We did all these things. We had the meeting. It was really well attended. People really enjoyed having these sessions to discuss things and actually figure out how we can change them. And we wrote them up again in F1000 Research. And I can share that also in a tweet later on. The paper is called Shaping the Future of Research, A Perspective from Junior Scientists. You know, interestingly, we thought maybe that would be the end of it and perhaps it would fizzle out, but we were really happy that it sort of then spread into other places. We've had meetings or organizing meetings now in Chicago, the San Francisco Bay Area, New York, the DC-Baltimore corridor. We're organizing our 4th meeting in Boston coming up, and then also in Canada now. We've had Calgary and Vancouver. So yeah, one of the major barriers here is getting people together, and how it was facilitated in the beginning in Boston, and why it sort of makes sense to me that Boston was sort of the first place that it was easiest to happen, was that at the same time, all the postdoc associations in Boston have been getting together to form a sort of mega postdoc association across the city. And New York has just done the same, and I believe Chicago is in the process of doing this too. So this was sort of nucleated out of a bunch of movements happening at the same time. There's also a lot of unionization movements happening across the US, particularly with grad students. And these sort of efforts are bringing people together more and sort of facilitating a lot of this interaction between folks. It's a major barrier that everyone faces in institutions, is how to get to the people in the lab. And half of it is just those of us who are in labs talking to our peers. There's sort of a barrier to having a conversation sometimes about these issues in the lab because it's not, you know, science that you're talking about. but really all these factors are so important to how we're practicing science and where we're going, that it's important to go back and speak to people in your labs about what's going on and asking what they think, and are they also bothered by these issues, and then trying to find the ways that you can engage. And because there's a whole bunch of groups out there doing all sorts of different things, it's really easy to find something that sort of fits your niche. So I think with the March for Science recently, there's a whole, even those of us who partnered up with the March for Science have sort of identified a whole bunch of other groups that we didn't know existed. And so I think that part of going forward for the March for Science seems to be that they might be facilitating this too and redirecting people's enthusiasm for science into various places. So definitely worth keeping an eye out on all their partner organizations and what they do. But really, we're very sort of policy focused, but obviously all the other people on this call are very into the open science as a primary goal, which we're also into as well, by the way, but as a very primary goal. And so, if that's really your thing, there's groups like Spark and OpenCon to get involved with as well, which are just some examples. So it's doing a bit of research about this. We're all researchers, we know how to define these things, can really be rewarding to find something that you're passionate about. There's probably a group out there for you that can really, really wants your energy. Yep, thanks.
Great, that was wonderful. So our next speaker is Osman Altieri. Now, your video's not working, but can you still hear us, Osman?
I do.
Oh, great. Okay. So Osman is the director and founder of Open Sedan, which is a student-run project advocating for open access, open education, and open data among educational institutions. So thank you for joining us today. Sorry that the webcam isn't working. And we look forward to hearing about what it's like to work with governments and your experiences. So,
thank you for the introduction. So my talk today is about the Open Sedan initiative that I started about 4 years ago. I'll be speaking a little bit about what we do, how did you get started, and then I'll be mentioning a few tips that will help you get started as well. So the Open Sedan initiative came as a venue for local students and early career researchers to contribute to the global open movement and advocate for the matters they are concerned about the most. Our core at Open Sedan is enlightening the fresh brains of students and early career researchers to come up with creative ideas and plans that helps us advocate best for openness. We ultimately aim to minimize the educational gaps created by economic and accessibility barriers in Sudan and other developing countries, as well as we aim to contribute to the global knowledge output as a community and as a country. So the initiative came up with many innovative methods to help us promote and advocate for openness among many educational, research, government, and non-government institutions and agencies here in Sudan. So we held many workshops, trainings, conferences, and campus campaigns to connect with peers, sponsors, policymakers. We also worked with other local and global organizations to create a richer content for the local audience. So looking at Open Sedan initiative, it actually came up as a way or as a method for us to make our voice heard in Sudan, and as an early career researchers community to add to the inclusiveness of the global open movement. At start, we used to gather and connect only with students and early career researchers at certain institutions, but then we expanded to connect more and gather librarians, sponsors, and all those concerned with the research environment in the country. The inspiration and how did we get started with Open Sedan came up after the Berlin 11 conference that was organized by the Writer Research Coalition and Max Planck Society. After coming from the conference, it was more of a personal motive, a personal purpose to take an action on a personal level. So the journey started, the journey of searching, connecting, and gathering peers together. And the very first barrier and obstacle I face as advocating in a developing country and I assume many of our audience are in developing countries. They might actually face this obstacle, which is getting the community to learn about open while they really have very little understanding of how research communication goes like, how publishing goes like. So we started with coupling research promotion with open movement, and we started with promoting for research and research practice, and afterwards advocating for good practice, and that's how we get started Open Sedan initiative. So few tips for you to get started as well as individuals coming to your local institution and trying to make a difference is it's a simple tool to use, which is the 2 whys tool. The first why is, why do you advocate for openness? I mean, there's basically no one really refused the open concept, and no one can deny all the benefits open can bring to all of us. But you need to be a little bit aware of why do you advocate for open. And once you have that answer, you're going to have a very clear purpose and a very clear motive to advocate for. Later on, people will come and ask you about why do you advocate for open. And the second why is, when you're trying to approach your peers or trying to approach other people around you, you need to assume why do they need or why should they get involved in the open movement. And this why should not be very complicated. For example, my why is I'm trying to help create a better healthcare systems by using open data and open access around the globe. We're going to have more research, we're going to have more discovery, and we can eliminate diseases and prevent diseases to happen. That is my personal why, and that's nothing less than actually attending a medical school to make an impact, because this one makes an impact as well. So you need to think about the why that will connect you with your peers, and that was the main purpose we could get people to work around open. There is just a very last sentence. The Open Access Week theme for 2017 is open in order to, so this could be a very excellent opportunity for you to use the theme to connect with your peers. Open in order to get yourself to get an answer, to open in order to, open in order to better health, open in order to develop educational curriculum, and whatever answer is you can get to connect with your peers around. I think that's our 5 minutes. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, no, focusing on the why get involved, why is it important, why are we doing this, I think is an excellent thing to keep in the forefront. Okay, so our final speaker is Nick Shoki, who is Director of Programs and Engagement at Spark, which is a global coalition committed to making open the default for research and education by advocating for open access, open education, and open data. Thank you for joining us, Nick. We look forward to hearing about what we can achieve once we've organized. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. It's hard to follow so many awesome folks in their presentations. But yeah, as Brianne mentioned, Spark's a global coalition that really works to set the default to open for research and education, and we've really seen working with the next generation of researchers, librarians, educators, administrators, really is core to all of that work, and it's really been my pleasure to focus a lot of my time at Spark on this work. So I actually came to Spark about 8 years ago now to work on these issues, specifically in engaging the next generation. And then my portfolio has sort of grown a bit here and there, but it's still probably the most fun part of my job. Don't tell anybody about that, though. But yeah, one of the roles that I have the pleasure of having within Spark is to organize OpenCon, which is sort of our conference and community for empowering the next generation to take the lead on setting the default to open for research and education. And it's sort of a hybrid thing. It's sort of equal parts conference and sort of year-round community. So we have our global annual meeting, which we announced earlier this month, will be in Berlin on November 11th through the 13th, hosted in partnership with the Max Planck Society. And the in-person meeting, while it's only one part of the conference, it's a bit unique because it's by application only. So we want sort of the best, most engaged, most energetic sort of students and early career researchers, early career librarians in the room, regardless of who can pay for travel funding. And so for that reason, it's by application only, and we give the majority of participants full or partial travel scholarships to attend. But beyond that main in-person meeting, there's actually 90% of the participation happens at satellite events like OpenCon CAM that was mentioned earlier, and about 29 other events that were hosted about across 20 countries and reached about 2,200 participants last year. So actually the bulk of in-person OpenCon participants are at these satellite events. And then finally, as I mentioned, there's sort of a year-round community where the alumni from the main meetings, as well as folks that organize and attend satellite events, and sort of just other early career researchers that are interested in these topics, sort of talk to one another, share their successes and challenges, and sort of work together to advance, open on their campus, in their countries, in their regions, and beyond. So if you are interested in these issues, would definitely suggest that you get involved in OpenCon at opencon2017.org. The organizers asked me to share a few lessons that we've learned from our time sort of building up the OpenCon community. We started it just a few years ago in 2014, and actually last year received thousands of applications to attend the main meeting from 176 countries, and there's a very active community of literally thousands of early career researchers. So we've sort of learned some things the hard way. So hopefully these, I guess, few tips might be helpful in your work locally or in your country or region. And the first and probably most important suggestion I would offer is just taking the time to find your sort of champions and your allies, and thinking about ways that you can surface those individuals, be that on your individual campus or within your country. And it sort of depends from project to project or campus to campus what might be most effective. I know, for example, some people have found hosting OpenCon satellite events are a useful way to find those people. That's certainly one self-interested way to do this, but it could just be as simple as starting to bring this up in conversations and making space, when you're in your lab, or collaborating with folks on campus, just to start talking about these issues and find people that feel similarly to you do. As Karina's already mentioned, librarians can be particularly powerful allies, so we definitely suggest you reach out to your library, especially if you have a scholarly communications librarian, a data management librarian, an open educational resources librarian. They can not only be a sort of a source of institutional knowledge, but oftentimes they'll have staff that are fairly familiar with open issues as well, and could help get you up to speed if you need that, or could help sort of increase your bandwidth for reaching out to others on campus. So once you do that, I think you can sort of transition that project of trying to find local champions and allies to sort of working more to build a community locally. And I think what Gary and Karina and Osman have already talked about really speaks to the importance of trying to build that community. And I think what I mean by that is not just sort of identifying allies and trying to get them to sort of march in the same direction, but really sort of invite the others at your institution or in your region that are interested to sort of be full partners in sort of creating this campaign to create your rampage group. I think it's how Karina put it, but really sort of try to have as collaborative an atmosphere as possible and get shared ownership so other people feel that they're invested in these initiatives, be they local ones on your campus or more broad than that. And then the final thing I will say is just that a lot of times we talk about how the next generation of researchers will define the future of whether research and education are open or not. But I think it's actually that's almost not right, and then I think the next generation of researchers are actually already defining what sort of the standard of research will be, what the expectations are for researchers, be that open or closed. And I think there are an incredible number of examples of how this is already happening. I'll tweet a link to our OpenCon community report that gives a lot of these, since I'm already starting to run over time. But just in the last week, we've had, for example, an early career researcher who was at Cambridge, I believe, Ross Mounts, Just actually today was his first day managing the Arcadia Fund's $10 million open access portfolio, and he came straight from being a postdoc. So already, early career researchers are going to be making a mark on, the foundations that shape this space. There are early career, government officials, across the world, in places like Argentina and Bangladesh that work, within government that are shaping the government policies as institutional leaders. There's tons of, people working on campus like Karina and Osman and many others that are having, a tremendous impact at the local level, creating sort of a culture of open science locally. So I'll just close by saying that I know it can be sort of intimidating to start these things from scratch, and it's probably one of the biggest challenges that comes up at every single OpenCon is people feeling sort of imposter syndrome about, do I really have like all the knowledge that I need to get started, or am I the right person, to launch this campaign? And it's just been incredible to see once people sort of decide, like, I'm just going to go for it. A lot of the really interesting outcomes, that they're able to have even as undergraduate students, but also, as Karina and Gary and Osman have pointed out, certainly as graduate students, as early career researchers, you can really have a tremendous impact, and there's so many examples where that's already happening, and hopefully we have some time during the Q&A to talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you. We absolutely will during the Q&A. So thank you to our speakers. That was great. I'm sure it's getting everyone in the audience thinking and inspiring us to advocate and try to change things that we know need to be changed. So I now invite everyone in the audience to ask questions to our panelists. You can either type a question into the question box here or tweet to us on Twitter at ELife_careers using the hashtag ECR Wednesday. I'll just see if, as the questions come in, I'm going to start with the first one for Osman, who we can't see but is still with us. And I just want to ask him if there's anything else besides, if he has any other tips. So we've heard a lot about you need your allies and focus on why we're getting people together and focus on the reasons why we need to be doing this and why people should be involved. But do you have any other tips in mobilizing the early career researchers to stimulate change?
Thank you. So I would always start by saying, look for the people that share the same interests with you and try to have conversations. You can always find those people around you at, for example, the OpenCon community and other rich communities around you. So try to find the people that share the same interests and have conversations about how can you move forward and how can you take actions to advocate for your own matters. Also, you can use some powerful tools to help you organize workshops or create whatever trainings you need to gather your peers around. And one of these is the speakers list of the Right to Research Coalition. They have a speakers list from people from all over the world. You can always contact one of them and invite them to speak about open access, for example, open education or open data, and other items as well. One more thing is that when you reach JiaBin, for example, we have some experience about working with governments, and the special approach we took when working with governments is that we kind of started by creating or building trust with the government. And this started by bringing people, early career researchers, to government officials and policymakers and try to bring them both into a common ground of understanding. For example, we try to tell the early career researchers how the government infrastructure was built to help you the most, and try to bring all these opportunities that many early career researchers does not know about from the governments to them. And this way you give governments more a sense like they're doing something, and here you bring that something to early career researchers. You do not start by making demands or asking for certain changes. Afterwards, you can ask for whatever change you want. That is the main strategy we use when we're approaching governments. So thank you.
Thanks. And did any of the other panelists want to add for some final tips on how to bring people together, or have we covered most things?
Yeah, so I want to just echo what Nick was talking about in that most of the people in my Rampage group I found through OpenCon Cambridge, and so we have monthly meetings where anyone can join, and you can put whatever you want on the agenda, and we also organize an annual event, which is a satellite to OpenCon. So it's not just about the annual thing. I think the monthly meeting is a really good way to network and plug in for me, it didn't feel super scary because it's all of us just coming there trying to learn together, and we all have different specialties. So I think that's a really, for me, kind of like a safe way to get started in your community.
Great. That's some excellent advice. So our next question is for Gary. What do you think the major barrier is to getting people together? Is this because people don't necessarily want to read to learn? Learn, so it doesn't matter face to face. What do you think a major barrier? Don't understand the second part of the question, but what do you think the major barrier is to getting people together?
I mean, everyone is overwhelmed in our community with trying to do everything at once, and it's it's at the level of you're expected to do all of your research and be at the bench the whole time. One of the things we are fighting for right now is that people can't go to a workshop to learn about how to write a grant because they feel afraid to leave the lab for training for something that they should be getting training on, especially when they're all called trainees. It's like the most fascinating thing that trainees find it hard to get training. So getting out to do anything is a real barrier to even the ones who are really driven to do it. And sort of fighting to protect your time, and also making sure that you're working with someone who you're working for someone who is happy enough that you're being productive in whatever ways that means to you. And also, speaking from my own experience, I found I was much more productive in the lab when I was also doing other stuff, because when an experiment isn't working, the worst thing you can be doing is banging your head against the bench for a week. But if you go out and do something else productive, like teach or write some thought piece or whatever, like you feel you've achieved something, and often just that change, in what you're doing with your mind can help you figure out the problem. But anyway, that's sort of the major thing, is trying to get over that barrier. And it's something that we're trying to deal with, particularly in what we're working on. The key thing is, I think, trying to lower the activation energy barrier by having groups, helping organize with groups on campus. If there's things like we're talking about OpenCon Cam, they have their monthly thing that's like a community that's there that you can go and join with. I believe you do your stuff at like lunchtime, so it's also you can, again, it's not great that you have to do it in your break, but again, we face these barriers of having to do stuff on weekends and so on, and in the evenings. So, and the early career community, we're being expected to do everything right now, and particularly right now in the world, we're expected to change science, we're expected to defend science, and yet we are given no recognition for doing stuff outside of the lab that everyone in academia is depending on us to do, and that's a sort of real frustration to me, that academia, rewards only stuff that goes towards papers in certain journals and getting grants and being successful in doing that, whereas we really need people out, doing all sorts of things through science right now. So, yeah, keep fighting the good fight. Like it's fun to do. I didn't know that I would have this job, to be quite honest with you, when I started doing this. It's kind of fascinating to see where you end up with this, and where your passion can take you. Yeah.
Great. So the next question is for Nick. What is the next mission for OpenCon?
I don't know if we have a next mission. I think really at the core, what OpenCon's seeking to do is create culture change at scale so that default or the open becomes the default, right? I think switching research to open isn't a technological problem. If there's anything I've taken away from Sci-Hub, it's that if a graduate student can build a piece of technology that's can more efficiently distribute the world's scholarly output to people than billion-dollar publishing houses, then the problem we have is not really a technical one. It's cultural. It's that early career researchers, tenure track faculty feel such pressure to publish in vanity journals, as Randy Sheckman calls them, or specific journals that are largely subscription based. And I think as long as that incentive structure is in place, it will be very difficult to get to an open system. And so I see OpenCon as a way to both sort of empower the next generation of researchers and librarians to sort of convince people that they can make a difference and have an impact, whether that's locally at their institution or at the national level within their country, or even even more broadly than that, in their region, and then equip them with sort of the sort of mentors, peer group resources, and hopefully in the future maybe even funding that they need to make that happen. If you think about sort of the task ahead of us we have in creating culture change across the entire sort of research community, that's thousands or tens of thousands of institutions around the world, and culture change is it's really messy, right? You can't create like an awesome TED Talk and just point everybody to it and expect that the culture is going to change. It actually requires probably millions of individual conversations where somebody that's decided to start shifting their practices to become more open just starts to share that with colleagues and get people to start to think a little bit differently and see open as more and more, see the benefits of that and sort of come to that shared viewpoint that open really should be the default, that it's better for research. And to do that, we need to reach hundreds of thousands of people. And so with OpenCon, we're trying to create a structure that can scale, that can reach reach those early career researchers, early career librarians, and others, to get them to see that they can have that impact, and then support them with the various means and in a sort of decentralized way that sort of scales to match the size of the problem that we have. So I don't think our mission's going to change, but what I hope to see is that the scale at which we're starting to be able to sort of affect change, continues to grow significantly. We've only been around since 2014, and we've grown about 3 times year on year each year. So I think it'll be difficult to keep that up. Obviously, you do the math and you run out of human beings after a decade or two. But I think it's been great to see the interest, and I think we're interested in working with everyone on this webcast and anyone that's interested to figure out sort of what it means to create that kind of culture change with you.
Great. That's a lot to think about. Now, the next question is talking about just asking, how have advocates benefited in terms of their research career from engaging in advocacy? So we know Gary was able, in a position that he never imagined he would be in when he started his advocacy. But I'll direct this question to Karina. Do you know of how advocates have benefited?
So for me personally, it goes back to Osman's question about why do I do this? Why am I advocating for openness? And the real reason is because it makes science more rigorous. And so if I am doing more, engaging in more open practices, not just open access articles, but also open peer review histories, open data, all kinds, as open and transparent as you can be, all of it improves my science. And I think the point of science is to do rigorous science, and so if we're not doing open, we're not doing rigorous science. And that for me is the biggest push for why all of these other practices that are compromising science, that I'm pushing against them. But I've also had, so I made a conscious effort through some feedback from that I got when I sent my CV to someone. I didn't say on my CV that I am publishing openly and ethically, and so when they were judging me, well, they were discriminating against me from where I was publishing. And I said, oh, well, I'm doing that on purpose. So I wouldn't publish in these journals with these impact factors because of these ethical reasons. And they said, oh, well, why don't you put that on your CV so at least we know what to expect? So I did. And then also I think through my advocacy efforts, people start to see me as trying to create change and doing this on purpose, and that they see that I'm doing it for scientific rigor rather than, I don't know why else someone might think that people do these things. And so it instills some kind of confidence in if they were to choose me for something. And actually, I just got a really amazing job at the Max Planck Institute, in part because of my publishing ethics. So I haven't had a negative experience in terms of my research career. The major through line, I have been discriminated against by reviewers for grant applications, but in terms of like getting the money I need and the jobs I need, it's been a boon rather than a hindrance.
That's great. And I'll say, even for me, I was invited to join the ELife Early Career Advisory Group 3 years ago because of the advocacy that I was doing, and it's been such an amazing experience and opportunity to meet other people and be involved in shaping journal and changing publishing. That, yeah, there are opportunities that come from speaking up, even though it is scary at first. Okay, so, sorry, yeah, absolutely.
And this is something that I've chatted about with Gary in future of research, and we don't have anything to officially like launch here. But I guess the point that I want to make related to what you were both referencing is that I think there's a huge problem that the next generation is completely unrepresented on the boards of most organizations. You know, look at a lot of the organizations in the space, scholarly societies, early career researchers, you know, or other early career individuals are largely absent from those groups. I mean, there are also large, you know, diversity problems on many of those boards, but, you know, the next generation is just woefully underrepresented, which I personally think is unacceptable. But for these organizations, right, boards are what should be doing strategic planning for the organization. If you don't have the next generation in creating your strategic plan for the future, you're doing probably not such a great job. And so it's a problem that Gary and Future of Research and I and sort of Spark have been chatting about. So we don't have anything to share there. But just to that sort of broader point about making sure, you know, sort of early career researchers' voices are heard and some of the advantages that can accrue to that, you know, we're very interested in finding ways to express the benefits of making sure there's been, you know, representation for the next generation within these boards of organizations that might also, you know, provide opportunities for others, but also, you know, I think it's something that ELife should be commended for having the Early Career Researcher Advisory Board. So hopefully we'll see change there in the future too.
Great. So we're almost out of time for the Q&A, but just so remember that you can still tweet us your questions. The panelists and the staff will be online on Twitter for the next hour or so trying to answer your questions. So it's hashtag ECR Wednesday, and that's at ELife_careers. But just as a final question, we know that there is this pressure, obviously, to publish, and a lot of PIs just want to talk about the data that's going to lead to publications, and they want you to focus your time on that because that leads to grants and papers and jobs. Do you think that there's any other reason why there would be that pressure not to focus on advocacy in academia or science, or to focus on these other types of pursuits to trying to improve science from more senior PIs? Does anyone have any insight into maybe if there's anything else going on?
So I'm not totally sure I understand the question. So is there a reason to do advocacy? So we should be focusing on research. So why do advocacy?
So why do you think that there is this, people often feel, so we know that PIs and senior academics will want us to focus on research that leads to papers. But do you think that there's any other reason why why people feel hesitant to advocate and speak up and feel pressure from their PIs, why it's not encouraged? Are there any other reasons besides just trying to publish why academics or PIs might not want junior researchers to speak up and advocate?
Yeah, it might not even be a question of want. It's just that they didn't do this and they don't understand, perhaps. I think genuinely it's like a little bit of confusion rather than it being ill intent a lot of times. It's the same with career things too, is why would you not want to be an academic? And, you know, there's a lot of selection bias here of like, these are the people who make it in academia, which is a small percentage of everyone. And so they just maybe don't understand why. You know, hopefully then they're willing to facilitate like having that conversation with you and helping you find out. But I think often there's a lot of just perception. I notice that a lot of people who are afraid to talk to their PIs maybe don't need to be afraid. When you often talk to the professors and so on and faculty, a lot of them are actually surprised to hear that people have these concerns. So I think that, again, we're not having these dialogues in the labs. So I think that's where just having that conversation could in many cases help.
Okay, well, that is it for the Q&A. I will now invite all of our panelists to offer just very brief closing remarks with what is your main piece of advice to postdocs and perhaps one action that we can take. So I'll start with Karina.
Okay, I think for me the main piece of advice is if you can't live with your choices, then why be an academic? You know, I don't feel like I would need to compromise my ethics to make money, and I don't need to make money in academia, so I'm not forced to do this, and I don't think we should be. So I am all for people doing what they think is right if they have reasons for thinking that it is right.
Gary?
You know, we all get into science, I think, to work on difficult problems, and science itself is one of the most difficult problems to be fixed. My key piece of advice is to read up on things, and especially to make data your friend. Again, you're a researcher. One of the things I find most useful and also most surprising is how often just going in with a reference or, you know, waving a copy of a book from 1969 that has discussed these problems, you know, for decades and nobody is fixing. Just having that in the room can often sort of rebut the nonsense that you hear of, oh, well, things have always been bad and, you know, or we can't do this because of reason X, and then again you pull out, you know, just being prepared with the data and doing your research is really helpful in this situation.
Osman, are you still there?
Yes. So my piece of advice is just get to know that there is always a group of people who can support you with whatever actions you want it to take. There are a lot of communities around you, and if you ever wanted to participate in global events like Open Access Week, Open Data Day, and other events, you can always have a large group of people around you to help you and support you. So do not be afraid to reach out for people for help. You can always email whomever you feel who can help you. So that's it. Great.
And Nick, final statement?
I would just repeat advice that I think Osman and maybe somebody else offered earlier, which is in reference of this year's International Open Access Week theme of open in order to. And I think that phrase is really good in focusing on sort of the concrete benefits that openness creates, and not thinking about sort of open as a goal in and of itself, but think about sort of the ways that open can strengthen science, and use that as a way to frame conversations that you have, you know, and trying to advocate for why the things, you know, why you're sort of, if you want to make your data available or publish in an open access journal like ELife, you use that phrase as a way to sort of talk about your action. So, you know, I'm making this data available so that it's more reproducible, and I think that's better for science. Or I'm making, you know, I'm publishing this in an open access journal so that it can be found by more people, and point to the data that shows that open publications receive more citations and downloads that in turn lead to, you know, more collaborators that find you because they can find your work. So just thinking about how you can sort of fill in that phrase of open in order to, with your PIs, the people that you're collaborating with on campus, your institution, if you want to take on institutional advocacy, and really sort of think about the benefits of open that there's lots of great data for. And I just tweeted an article using the hashtag at bit.ly/advantages of open that was done by Aaron McKiernan and a handful of other people, that does a really good job of outlining and sort of cataloging all of the benefits of open, and sort of using the data on those benefits and matching them up to what's going to be most compelling to the people that you're trying to talk to, be that your PI, your institution, or even your national government.
Great. Well, thank you again to our speakers and everyone who tuned in and contributed to our discussion today. We hope that everyone attending will leave knowing more about how some of us are organizing and advocating for early career researchers, what has been effective, and we hope you take away at least one key thing that you can try to help galvanize your peers towards a common purpose. We would very much appreciate hearing any feedback, so we will be emailing out a short survey soon, so we would appreciate it if you filled that out. And then one final note before we end, I just want to mention that the nominations for the ELife Early Career Advisory Group are now open. As I mentioned, this is a group of graduate students, medical students, postdocs, and junior PIs from around the world that aims to represent the needs and aspirations of researchers at early stages in their careers. And this group helps drive ELife's work to catalyze broad reform in scientific publishing and research communication. The founding members have helped inspire and bring to life a number of valuable initiatives for the early career community, including this webinar series, as well as travel grants and the early career reviewer pool, and many more initiatives. So if you are passionate about improving the quality of the early career experience, especially in the life sciences, biomedicine, and related fields, and if you have energy and creativity to share, please join us. The deadline for nominations is June 18th. So please continue the discussion on Twitter and stay tuned for the next webinar on ECR Wednesdays, which will be held June 28th. And we will be discussing refreshing approaches to researcher evaluation. So have a great day, everyone. Thank you for joining. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Everyone.